There's a knife for sale right now, probably in a shop near you, stamped with the words Damascus steel. It has a lovely rippled pattern, like light on water, and it costs more because of the name. Here's what the shop won't tell you. That knife is an imitation of a legend, and the legend itself is real. For roughly 1,000 years, swords came out of the Middle East with an edge that Europe couldn't match, and a surface marked with flowing bands. Blades that were hard where hard mattered and springy where brittle killed. Crusaders brought home stories that grew in the telling. A sword that could slice a silk scarf drifting in the air, an edge that stayed keen through battle after battle. Then, somewhere in the 18th and 19th centuries, the knowledge died. The smith stopped, the recipe went with them, and for 200 years nobody, not with all of modern science, has been able to make the original again the original way. This is the story of what Damascus steel actually was, why it worked, why it vanished, and the twist waiting at the bottom. When scientists finally put a real blade under a modern microscope, they found something inside it that wasn't supposed to exist until the 21st century. Start with the name, because it points the wrong way. The steel didn't come from Damascus. It came from furnaces in southern India and Sri Lanka, where, by at least the middle of the first millennium BC, smelters had worked out something nobody else on Earth could do: melting steel in a sealed pot. Everyone else made iron in a solid, spongy lump and hammered the impurities out. These smelters packed iron with wood and plant matter into a clay crucible, sealed it, and cooked it until the metal drank in carbon and melted into a small, dense ingot, a cake of steel the size of a hockey puck. The trader's word for those cakes came down to us as wootz. The carbon content was startling, around 1.5%, roughly twice what most modern blade steel carries, which by every rule of simple metallurgy should have made the ingots hopelessly brittle. Somehow, in the right hands, it didn't. The ingots traveled the caravan routes west, and in the markets and workshops of the Middle East, city smiths forged them into the blades Europeans came to name after the greatest of those trading cities: Damascus. What made a wootz blade special wasn't just sharpness, and it wasn't magic. It was a marriage most steel can't manage. Steel is a compromise. Make it hard and it turns brittle, make it tough and it goes soft. A wootz blade held an edge like glass but flexed like a whip, and it advertised the trick right on its surface. Those watered bands weren't decoration. They were the internal structure made visible. Inside the blade, iron carbide, a compound so hard a file skates off it, had gathered into sheets of microscopic particles, layered through softer, tougher steel like reinforcing rods in concrete. Hard sheets to carry the edge, tough matrix to absorb the shock. The pattern was the recipe, printed on the product. Which raises the real question, the one that took modern science until the 1990s to answer. How do you get the carbide to line up in bands, using a charcoal furnace, with no thermometer, no microscope, and no idea that carbon exists? The answer is one of the great detective stories in metallurgy, and it started with a blacksmith and a professor. Through the 1990s, John Verhoeven, a metallurgist at Iowa State University, worked with Alfred Pendray, a Florida bladesmith, on a simple, stubborn project: make true wootz from scratch and find out why it works. They cooked ingots by the old crucible method, forged them, failed, changed one variable and failed again for years. And the variable that finally flipped the result was almost insultingly small: a vanadium. A trace impurity, riding along in the iron ore at levels around 40 parts per million, a few grams hiding in a whole ingot. As the ingot slowly cooled, those traces settled into faint layered zones, and during the long cycles of gentle forging, the carbide particles condensed along them like fog along a cold riverbank. Get vanadium-bearing ore, and the patient thermal cycles right, and the bands assemble themselves. Use cleaner ore, purer ore, better ore by every other measure, and no pattern will ever form, no matter your skill. Sit with that for a second, because it explains the whole mystery, including the dyeing. The medieval smiths didn't know vanadium existed. Nobody did. They knew that ingots from certain sources, worked in certain rhythms handed master to apprentice, made blades with water in the steel, and that others didn't. The knowledge wasn't a formula anyone could write down. It was a partnership between craft tradition and one particular geology. Which means it was fragile in a way nobody involved could see. Swap the ore because a mine plays out or a trade route shifts, and the pattern dies and no adjustment of skill can bring it back. Verhoeven's suspicion is exactly that. The source ores changed or ran out, and the tradition starved. History piled on. Crucible steelmaking in India faded through the 18th and 19th centuries as European industrial steel flooded in. Colonial rule pushed the old industry down, and by around 1900, the living chain from master to apprentice, unbroken for 2,000 years, had gone quiet. No villain twirled a mustache. A technology simply starved to death, one variable and one retirement at a time, and nobody realized what was being lost until it was gone. Now for the twist, because the old smiths weren't done embarrassing us. In 2006, a team at the Technical University of Dresden took a genuine 17th-century Damascus sabre, forged by the celebrated smith Assad Ullah, dissolved a sliver of it in acid, and looked at what remained under a high-resolution electron microscope. Inside the steel were carbon nanotubes, cylinders of carbon a few billionths of a meter across, the celebrated wonder material of 21st-century laboratories, and threaded through them, nanowires of that hard iron carbide. The team published in Nature, and the finding stands as one of the strangest sentences in materials science. A bladesmith working 400 years ago, over charcoal, by eye and feel and inherited rhythm, was manufacturing nanostructures we needed a transmission electron microscope to discover. He had no idea. He just knew the steel sang when he made it right. So what about that knife in the shop window? Modern Damascus is pattern-welded. 2 different steels stacked, forge-welded, folded, and acid-etched so the layers show as stripes. It's real craftsmanship and often excellent steel, but it's a different technology wearing the old name. The pattern sits in layers a smith stacked, not in bands the metal grew for itself. And to answer the question everyone types into the search bar, no, it isn't stronger. A well-made pattern-welded blade is as good as the steels inside it, and a plain bar of modern powder steel will outperform both it and every genuine wootz blade ever forged. We didn't fail to surpass Damascus steel, we surpassed it a century ago. What we lost is something more particular, and honestly, more haunting. The exact living recipe, the ore-to-edge tradition that made the metal grow its own reinforcement. Verhoeven and Pendray proved we can recreate the mechanism. What no one can recreate is the lineage. Here's what remains genuinely open, and why this story is bigger than swords. We still can't say which mines fed the great blades, or exactly which thermal rhythms each school of smiths used, because the people who knew never wrote it down. The answers are scattered in slag heaps and museum steel, waiting for someone to look. But the sharpest lesson of Damascus steel isn't in any furnace. It's this: knowledge that lives only in hands can die. A skill practiced for 2,000 years, refined past what its own masters could explain, vanished in 2 generations because it was never written anywhere but in people. The blade that cut the silk scarf was real enough. What cut deeper is how quietly the world can forget a miracle, and how a few grams of an element nobody had named hiding in the ore of a played-out mine, could hold up a legend for 1,000 years and then let it fall.